Happy Sunday, January 8th, 2023. We're back with another episode of Reel It In. I'm Dan Sapin in Long Island, New York.
I'm Martin Holberg calling in from Stockholm, Sweden.
Joe Messina here in Boston. Soon to be outside of Boston, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, you're in orbit around Boston.
So, Dan, how was your week?
Pretty personal question. All right, I'll go with it. No, it was so full of work and routine and sort of thinking, all right, do I want to do this New Year's resolution thing? That it was basically just it all just sort of canceled itself out. So I had no New Year's resolutions. I had a few things I was annoyed at myself about, such as leaving paperwork too long, such as not taking enough time to exercise. I think my dog thinks I'm sort of phoning it in, and so I think I now I'm not going to do this like a New Year's resolution. I'm just going to say I have to get off my ass and start exercising again. Because what I realized is when I exercise regularly, all the rest of the stuff doesn't bother me. So I think I've kind of narrowed it down. And other than that, I've been sitting and seeing patients all week, which I love, by the way. I love my job. No problem there. Um, and I actually have been thinking a bit about something that we wanted to talk about, which was this Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, doing a talk on a book and then a talk on YouTube about men and loneliness. And I was thinking about distance between people and difficulties connecting. Also, how kind of fortunate, especially the last few years of my life, have been in terms of good friendships. So I think that leads right into where we're at today. All right.
Cool. Yeah, I watched that thing too. From my end, I didn't hear him talk about men and loneliness though. I don't know if we watched the same clip, but I watched a clip where he talked about loneliness in the States. He had visited
Yes.
all these different kind of segments of society, and he made kind of a point that this kind of the loneliness pandemic, as he called it, it was like a unifactor in the sense that it was like, Republican or Democrat, old or young, men or woman, like this is relevant everywhere.
Yeah.
So I watched that clip yesterday for an hour.
You're right. It wasn't the men. We talked about men and loneliness at one point.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. We did the previous show or the one before.
yeah.
We did, and I mean, one could probably, infer certain things such as how men would act out their desperation. In general terms, one can have fantasies and ideas about, destructive behavior in certain kind of populations being, being expressed differently, maybe one could say. But as far as his book goes and the talk I saw, it was like he made a point. I think he even said something that because that office is like a politically somehow he's elected for a number of years, or how does it work?
How was the Surgeon General elected? I could
It's
look it
just
up. I don't remember.
a presidential appointee.
It's just
Okay.
an appointee.
So yeah, maybe
Okay.
like a Senate confirmation, but yeah.
So he was
Yeah,
Obama's, this guy was Obama's Surgeon General or General
I
Surgeon.
believe so. Yeah,
Because I think
I
he made
doubt
a
that Trump
point
would have
that he said
appointed.
that
Yeah,
in Washington, he said that even the kind of polarized political climate would kind of unite along the lines of loneliness or, the importance of addressing this topic or the importance of understanding it better. Like it touches everybody. He made a kind of point around that. And I guess that would be
yeah,
true. I guess even Republicans would feel bad about being lonely, even though some might say they deserve it, right? But that's
yeah,
that's that's a different story. So I
yeah,
think that was quite interesting. That it's like a general phenomena that can strike anytime, anybody, rich or poor, and it can have devastating consequences in terms of like smoking. He made a point that it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day or something.
yeah.
Like
That was right.
being
That the health risks of loneliness, that the
yeah.
stress on the body
Mm-hmm.
equates that. I want. Let me jump in for a second because it's silly. There was one outstanding thing that happened this week, which I told you about, Martin, which was I took some really primo shrooms on Wednesday night. And one of the things, yes, I'm out, as if anybody who knew me didn't know this already. But I happened to get my hands on some very good quality mushrooms. And I was having this particular really just a dull day, dull night. And I felt it was time for a tune up, basically. That was the way I thought it. And it was one of the more intense experiences I've had. And it was really it was ecstatic. It was one of those transformative psychedelic experiences that people are watching, listening to the account of on Netflix, and the book by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind. But one of the things that rang out clear is something that's come through in most of my few other psychedelic experiences, and that was this sense of obvious certainty, with a great deal of clarity. I mean, for anybody who hasn't done this, you don't feel high. You're as conscious and sharp as you would be at any other moment. You're just picking up a lot more frequencies from within and from without. And one of the things that has always come to me, and it was louder than ever this time, was that love and the connection between all things, but particularly the conscious beings who are able to sort of take a look at the world and themselves and how things fit together. That conflict, negativity, schisms, divides are artificial. They are born out of fear. They are born out of survival instinct impulses, you could say, and that at base there is a universe that holds together, and that this realization, which again, the first time I did this in college, and I saw the trees breathing and sort of got a sense of every living thing in the vicinity sort of whispering to something else living in the vicinity. That was all well and good. This time it was loud and clear that there should not be loneliness. And if there were loneliness, conflict, division, it is because of fear. I'm not even going to make it more complex than that. It was a response to fear that makes people put up walls, shut other people out, decide whom to hate. And what came to me as you were speaking before about Vivek Murthy's point about that it applies to everybody across the political spectrum, is that the topic of intimacy and loneliness, well, talk about a vicious circle. That we're in a time now when the political divides in America, and as far as I can see around the world, are as intense as they've been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it has become fraught with danger to even broach certain subjects in conversation unless you know the other person really well, because there are so many ways of tipping your hat about what your beliefs are, what your political party is, your view on religion, your view on some domestic or international crisis that divides people. So there are more barriers to intimacy, to emotional connection to people, and more risk of loneliness, and sort of a kind of fraudulence when you talk to people, not being able to present yourself as you are, more so than at any time I can remember. And yes, this nice psychedelic experience drove the point home that it is friggin' unnecessary. So that was the interesting part of my week.
Cool. I like it, man. It's like you're setting the bar for this.
Yeah.
Us liberal psychonauts, we can psychologize and take trips in love lane, but I'm wondering how the Marxists among us feel about the national surgeon's points.
Well, I was just about to say that, Dan, you're starting to sound a little communist, and I like it.
I do most things for your approval. I'm not lying anymore.
But yeah, so that is something that uh, I had a similar experience with mushrooms. Um, that was my psychedelic of choice a decade or so ago. Um, I did it. Well, I only did it a couple of times, but so the first time was really good, and it was like all that stuff you just said. Second time was not so good, and I think I actually might have contacted you after that. Um, yeah, and I think we talked about that because I was just sort of like I'm just feeling like why like what it did sort of the inverse this time. It just kind of broke me. Um but yeah, sometimes you need to, you need help like coming back to earth after those things, but it can be like super positive. Um and so what was I gonna oh yeah, okay. So I was gonna bring this up later in the conversation, but because you mentioned fear, and I think there is value in that like message about fear that you sort of get from things like mushrooms, um, and it is part of the equation. Uh, but one of the things that set me off about Vivek Murthy was that he went into that like fear versus love cliche, um, and that seems to be way more like prevalent, like way more ubiquitous um, idea than I realized. Uh, and it bothers me because it's uh, it's just too sort of I feel like it oversimplifies the problem, and it oversimplifies the the world. It just
It's
over
really sugar coated.
Yes. Yeah, and I was so I got it really like set me off when I heard it. So I started looking into like where did this come from, because um I the first time I heard it was in the movie Donnie Darko. Um and that movie sort of rebukes it a little bit actually, because it's like one of his teachers or something is like obsessed with that idea, and he like um you know tells her like to fuck off or something, and then gets in trouble at school. like um so that's where I remember hearing it. Then you go back a little, a decade or and a half or so, and Bill Hicks was talking about it. um and that was interesting because Bill Hicks was still like a comedian I really like. um then I sort of traced it back. There's like a little bit of a movement with this idea in 1960s or so, like or psychological, or the hell is it called? Not psychiatry, the other one,
Psychology,
yeah,
psychologists,
um,
Who are those?
psychonauts.
yeah, sorry, cosmonauts. But there was like a bit of that going on with the whole 60s vibe. But this actually might go back to the Bible. Um, there's a quote from John. I don't know how to say the Bible citations, but 1 John 4:18. Um, There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. And, you know, again, like the Bible's been translated a million times, and who knows, and I haven't read it, so take that as you will. But uh that is, I get that like the New Testament was sort of turning the Old Testament like vengeful God on its head, and this whole like instead of fearing God, like you're loved by God, and then you're perfected in his image, or whatever the hell it is. um but it even in this Bible context, it just struck me as very sort of uh it sounds
Flimsy.
like it's from a rom-com or something, like it's just like a dumb idea. So Anyway, that was a piece of what I had an issue with.
Let me jump in there. It's very interesting. Like, we get all kinds of ideas where to go with this. My association was to Lord of the Rings. When you start speaking about these movies and places where you'd seen this before, and we are talking before about Ursula K. Le Guin. How do you say it in English? Le Guin?
Ursula K. Le Guin.
Le Guin. We're talking before the show started about her and like all the kind of myths and movies and drama out there contains these poles. I think it's very kind of salient in many ways, and I think there are kind of principles that can be definitely used to the extent that Dan was speaking about them, things that hold stuff together, like holding even the universe together as a force. But on a more kind of concrete and individual level, there are a myriad of other factors, of course, that structures how people express themselves, their emotions, their capabilities, their, there's huge nuance between all is love and then looking at like an individual in a specific setting with a job, with a family, with all his or her things. So it's complicated. But what I wanted to take it to was a quite weird, perhaps, parallel. We have a debate in Sweden about literature. There's a debate in the press about what is good literature and what is bad literature. And basically, the press, like the debate, started by this guy who was in the jury for a very fine prize that is given out every year. The prize is given to quality literature that sells a lot. So it's kind of a mix. Like the prize has this public connotation that whoever wins the prize, every Swede usually buys that book that year. So there's a lot of money for the person who wins the prize. So the guy who wrote the article, who was part of the jury, he said, this is a selling price. It should be books that are easy to read, stop the snobbery, stop trying to pick, indie literature for this price. Then he got a lot of replies from people saying like, literature cannot be reduced to market, forces. There is a value proper in not subsiding to the market forces. And, this price should definitely be given to real literature, whatever that is. Then the third wave of the debate came where this woman wrote an article, very interesting, I think. She's like, this whole point of dividing literature into good and bad is already a part of the kind of bourgeois culture within which, you make out as an enemy from within the system. So her point was basically like, if we can stop this schism, we'd be better off for it, and let fine literature sit next to less fine literature, sit next to market literature with literary ambitions, sit next to, so to have more of this nuanced kind of landscape or rhizomatic landscape. And I think a little about similar maybe in this terms of like love and fear, like how is the line drawn up and where, and what do we gain by positing, fear is over there and love is here, and I am the normative point to make the judgment, or like I would like to problematize it that way, that and this is also very political in the sense that if you within a system can expel, like if we can say this is market crap literature, or these people are phonies, or these people are fear driven, and so on, we have also created the impetus for that fragment to then retaliate. We have somehow created the Proud Boys, or whatever we should use as an analogy. So if we were able to harbor better, like the totality of it, maybe then, I don't know. I'm not really hitting the mark, but I'm kind of, I guess.
You're hitting a lot of stuff. One thing that came to mind, one of the realizations that I had in my little, this was my psychedelic experience this week, was sort of the sequel to one I had when I was 35, which was in 1999. My old friend Ed, I wonder how Ed is doing. And it was a similar experience. in which I had kind of a guided tour by a higher being who was very clear about not wanting to be mistaken for the God of the Bible. But one of the things that came clear in that experience, which came up again uh, this week, was that most of the concepts that are presented as binaries, uh, distant points on the spectrum, love, hate, uh, desire, satisfaction, good, evil, they are at base nothing but projections of human cognition, which is fed by human emotion. That the idea of good and bad is, or good and evil, can, if you boiled it down a little bit, you would eventually see that the concepts themselves disappear. That good compared to what? Good as defined by what and by whom? I think that one of the things that almost always comes up in a debate about, let's imagine we're talking to a diehard Proud Boy, an articulate one who believes very, very strongly in the inherent evils and hypocrisies of the Democratic Party, even of the old guard, right or left. And if I were to say to this guy, but I've had this awesome experience. It was just like the flower children, or the hippies were right. All is love. And let's say that the guy wants to engage me in a little serious debate about this, and he says, all is love. All right, fine. So if all is love, why is there so much violence in the world? Why are there bad diseases? Why is Mother Nature so cruel? And you have what about those lions tearing apart an antelope? Was that full of love? And eventually, the word reality is going to come up, or realistic. Get real. Reality isn't so sweet, isn't so sappy. Well, there's something about laying claim to reality that kind of gives the lie to it all. Even when I say, yes, my enlightened psychedelic experience showed me that the only true thing is love. And I heard myself saying something that could have just come right out of some cheesy Bible aphorism. But the point here is that love, the way it felt in that psychedelic experience. Look, I've lived a life with a lot of, I've been on the receiving end and the giving end of a lot of anger in my life. I was raised in a loving family that was obsessed with always pointing out who was smarter than who was better than who. There was always comparison. And at a young age, I began to recognize there's something really off about this. Why is everything and everybody compared to something else? And there's always something inferior. There's always a loser in these discussions. And the point that came home to me is that most of us on our best day are not capable of getting away from these binaries that structure our life. That even the case of, guys, we got to call pause here. Joe, can you mark this for an edit or something? I completely lost my train of thought. I was trying to remember something that happened on Wednesday night, and I just lost the thread.
That's all right. We still love you, man.
Thank you. The point that I have been trying to get across, let me just throw this out to you before we hit green again, was that it isn't that reality doesn't include a lot of ugliness. It's not that every creature devoid of a fucked up psychological structure is just grooving on God's love all the time. Yes, life has pain. Thermodynamics is entropy. Things fall apart. I know that. The idea is that it's amazing that the world holds together at all. all, that we don't go crazy from trauma. We may suffer, but somehow we wake up the next day almost every time. And that the binary, I've been thinking about how there have to be, hypothetically anyway, imagine the intelligent aliens hypothesis, uh, that they're not humanoid. They live in a different kind of world. Let's say they're aquatic beings, and there are no edges in their society. What's that?
I love the fact that they were aquatic beings also. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water is cool.
Yeah.
They imagine living in a. I was thinking of the movie The Abyss. It was James Cameron's first big one. It was a pretty good film in a lot of ways. That if you have beings who evolved and live in a place where there are no fixed edges, where flow is just the ground state of existence, then how would you come up with opposites at all?
Yeah.
And some would say, well, you're not going to have intellect then, because intellect always involves the capacity to atomize, to divide things into units and compare. But there is an intuition that has already come up in a lot of literature, in a lot of science fiction. Ursula Le Guin, actually, do we want to? We can just, Joe, you're just going to edit this thing, right?
Yeah.
And get rid of this moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say we're on. Well, when I said from the point where I said cut, basically.
Okay. Are we now starting?
I lost my train of thought. Yeah.
Okay.
So I thought it was great that you mentioned Ursula Le Guin, because in the middle of all my science fiction loving period, really starting around 2000, I was just inhaling science fiction books, and I came across Le Guin, who I had liked when I was a teenager. Le Guin talks about spaceships. She has her Hainish cycle. It's this, this civilization of the original humanoids that have been seeding the reachable galaxy with their own DNA. And really, what she was doing, Le Guin, was experimenting with what would happen with the human genome, with the basic potentialities of human beings, if you started them fresh in a slightly different environment. What if you could seed the galaxy and come back X number of hundreds of thousands of years later and see what happened if the human genome got to evolve on a planet with slightly less gravity, or two suns, or let's say just by one of the normal quirks of genetics, you end up with creatures that are essentially asexual but adopt gender or sexual difference when it's time to mate, when it's time to start a family unit. That you have essentially full-time hermaphrodites who can specialize when needed. There you have, one out of many examples of Ursula Le Guin experimenting with a society or a subspecies of humans which do not have the binaries that we have, that male and female become fluid, that good and evil are defined differently, right?
But love and fear. Do you include love and fear in this?
I am absolutely including love and fear.
Yeah.
Now,
I was just wondering that you use good and evil, so I thought that maybe it was a conscious choice to not choose love and fear.
No, it's a good point. I'm coming back around to love and fear because you have the abstractions of good and evil, and then you have human experiences of love and fear. And that people who speak about being realistic might say that nature is ugly, that fear is everywhere, because something is always trying to eat something else. Something is always trying to, kill that guy and take his cave so you can have some place to live. Yeah, that's some of the stuff that happens in the natural world, and you better be afraid because it hurts. But the love and fear part of it really boils down to, if it were all fear, if fear and hatred, if the hard stuff was the ground state, people say, come on, when you say be realistic, they're saying stop with all the sentimental crap. Stop with all the namby-pamby, sweet, sugary, the Bible, John, Timothy, whatever it was that had said only when you have not been perfected in God's love can you feel fear. Well, there's an artificial set of opposites over there. Um,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have a society to begin with if it was all fear. What binds people to begin with? And then when you have some sort of a stable society, what enables people to hang together and not destroy themselves? So the question of good and evil is an abstraction, but love and fear, what would a society in which people loved each other wholly all the time even look like? Of course, in the day to day, you have the conflicts and the frictions, that cause fear and anger and violence. But knowing that there is a point at which the oppositions, the anger, the friction disappear,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that things hold together.
Yeah, I agree.
Very
Joe, yeah, go ahead.
was gonna say it's very dialectically materialist. Um, the way that the the context matters a lot, and um, you know who's doing it matters a lot. Like reading, I'm reading about a lot of dialectical materialism now in my like unofficial uh, degree in Marxism I'm getting, but it's the way I keep thinking of it is in terms of political divisions is like the BLM riots versus the MAGA, Capitol riot. And there were a lot of people going like, well, if you supported Black Lives Matter, then you should support this, or if you don't support this, you shouldn't support And it's like, no, actually, like political violence is not, it's not to be desired. It's not like my favorite thing, but like it does matter who's doing it and why.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like that's what I think about a lot with that.
Yeah. Well, dialectically, materialistically, Joe, think of what democracy, even just a basic functional flawed democracy, entails. The idea of everybody getting a vote, and the person who gets the most votes is the leader for a little while. And everybody gets on board with it, even if they're not pleased with the outcome. It implies even a naive faith that we divide in order to make a rational choice, and then we unite because the good has been served. That we have a process that ensures good. And now we can all live for the next 4 years with an imperfect union. And that would be really nice. Those who argue in favor of America, however, all too often do things like they want to hang the vice president. They want to storm the Capitol in order to create a more perfect democracy.
Yeah.
Um, the contradiction, the way in which fear and anger end up turning even the basics of a flawed democracy into a laughing stock. And somebody who can make an equivalence between January 6th and a Black Lives Matter rally, there's no comprehension there. That the aims of the two
Yeah,
are opposite.
exactly. That's insidious, and that's how maybe what's dark operates. If one would take like this metaphysical view that, let's say, there is such a thing as evil or fear that exists in the world in opposition to light and love and good, that these are kind of forces that imbues people, societies, worlds with their force, so to speak. I would say that whoever makes that claim, the January 6th would be the same as the MAGA, like what you just said, the BLM riots, for example. That is a kind of corrupt act, and this is exactly what's happening in Sweden as well. Like, on the one hand, the people who won the election, they won the election, So in one logic, it's fair, so to speak. They got more votes, they should get the office. That's within the rules of the game. But the other world that's also there at the same time is that these guys are anti-democratic forces. They're introducing stuff that has never been introduced. That's not supposed to be part of the game we're playing. right? So they're corrupting, co-opting, destroying, manipulating the very game itself in terms of like trying to bully journalists, trying to figure out kind of who gives money to what human rights organizations. You know, there was something where they would try to forbid a Lucia celebration because it was not a girl, you know, like a very kind of misogynistic, traditional, patriarchal kind of view. They have forbidden trans people to hold. We have this tradition in Sweden that for some reason trans people read sagas in the libraries. So in many cities, you can go with your small kids and there's like these drag queens dressed up and they read like fairy tale for an hour, right? So and it's very popular. It's a kind of cool thing.
Yeah,
So
I
this
love
this
Scandinavia.
yeah, the new kind of government is trying to outlaw these things, you know. So and so on and so on, right? So that you have these two worldview or these two conceptions of reality operating simultaneously. Where on the one hand, there is a kind of democratic principle in the sense that they won the election that needs to be respected, you know. But then they are trying to destroy the very fundaments that gave them that election. And those forces that are kind of creeping in, they are insidious, you know, they are something that is somehow fear driven and corrupted. And because in terms of lie or love, I started thinking about beyond. I've read somewhere that love is that which brings people closer together. Or no, he talked about truth. You see, they go close together.
The instinct for truth and love.
Yeah, yeah, they go
Mhm.
together. Like they are the processes that creates proximity. And on the other hand, you have processes like shame and isolation, this stuff that Murthy, the national surgeon, talked about, like the downgoing spiral of lonely people. They feel ashamed for being lonely. They don't want to tell people how they're actually feeling. They start taking to like addictions and other kind of behaviors to mask for themselves, you know, to not admit to themselves. And it goes down and down and down. So you have that kind of couples of like anger, shame, isolation, cover up, you know, hiding, like all those things. And then there's like openness, light, proximity, truth. So there is something to that, to those differences. But the way they play
Resolution,
out, sorry?
the way things harmonize. People
Yeah,
like
well, I
to
mean,
use
these two
harmony
camps, if
as a,
you will, you
yeah.
know, like all the fairy tales and all the kind of like all the movies, right? You have these two kind of forces that are somehow battling with each other. And I think there's definitely something profound in that. But how to tip the scales or whatever, I think is a lot bigger than what Murthy was talking about. Like I really dig his kind of passion for what he's trying to do. I felt that he was a sincere guy. He also kind of talked about his own feelings of loneliness. And I really like what he said about put people first. You know, he felt like to me at least, a genuinely nice guy. I didn't feel that he was trying to score points or whatever. He felt like he would believed in what he was doing. And I liked his analysis of the problem. But I think his way to talk about the solution was a little bit too idealistic. You know, basically like me and my wife are writing this book to try to tip the scales, and you know that's beautiful. I don't want to like take that away from him in any sense, but in terms of trying to affect this change, I think there needs to be also some kind of more materialistic recognition of what's actually going on in terms of power dynamics, material wealth, you know, corruption, all these things that are playing into this. You know, it takes more than just um, kind of inside job on. I think I don't know. I mean, maybe
Right.
I'm wrong. Maybe this is just like a cynical defense on my part. Maybe it's actually true that if everybody got enlightened inside themselves, maybe that would tip the scales. But it feels to me like one or two Jeff Bezos or something. You just like suck up the whole fucking effort we've done. Yeah.
I was gonna say I'm glad you brought that up because that's pretty similar to my criticism of it. Um, like I do think, yeah, like his recognition of the problem is pretty good. Like it seems like he did serious research on this and everything. Um, and you know, I would also add like to tie the two together here. Uh, we were talking about this dialectical thing, and I think a lot of people experience this thing where, like, I go to work and I see a bunch of people. I talk to my coworkers, I talk to people on the phone, I do, interact with people on the internet all day outside of work, and I live with my wife, and that's great, and like all this stuff. But then, like, you can still feel lonely after all of that interaction. um, and that's, sort of the dialectic at play here. But yes, I was going to say something about this. And again, while it seems like he is sincere, he seems like a good guy, and like did serious work on this, I am, like, there's just purely my perspective, but there's also just like a bit of a skepticism about the uh I don't know how much he really wants to solve the problem, or like how much he is aware of the causes, because I just don't believe it's possible to like fully look at a problem like this and not come to these disturbing conclusions about, like, the way the world order works is kind of a huge problem. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing that they're missing. So I just want to real quick quote um uh Michael Parenti, who is a fantastic Marxist, um uh I I guess just author, professor. um and he gave this great speech, and it's been dubbed the Yellow Parenti speech, because whoever took this video in like 1983, uh, it's just all yellow. But anyway, if you go to YouTube and type in Yellow Parenti, you find this fantastic lecture he gave. And there's a great part where he says, and I'll try to do it in his East Harlem accent: you can see the troubles you get into, the swamps you go into, the baby talk silliness you get into when you think without Marx, when you think without class analysis. And that's what I feel like is happening here. And it's what happens with so many of these people who come out of serious roles in politics, and who again seem like genuine, like intelligent people who really look into these problems. Um, and it's like, why do I feel, after all of that, all of those good qualities about you, why do I feel like you're still missing the point?
That's a great way to frame it. Now, actually, the question, why do we keep missing the point? Missing. Yeah, both. The point, I think it is a very good way to frame it. What is it about us? What is it about our lives, our wishes, our the ease with which we are deceived by the thoughts and feelings of others and ourselves? Well, dialing back to Murthy, um, you want context? All right. Murthy is a surgeon general. A surgeon general is a figurehead. All right. Yeah, he does work. He's a physician. He's up on the science, but he's also a guy who is putting forth um, the health related ideological agenda of an administration.
Yeah.
And well, what was Obama? He was supposed to be the great uniter, right? He was, there's the explicit stuff, the community organizer, the community uniter in Chicago. He's a mixed race guy who, by all modern definitions, is an African American because he's got a little color. And so we have that binary there, which of course means he's tainted to a great many people. But one of the first answer I came up with, Joe, while you were talking about what was wrong with Murthy's well-intentioned and even in some respects correct talk, it's that we are a civilization built around advertising. And to advertise something, you must eliminate the ambiguities. You must eliminate anything that complicates the path to desire, the path to conformity, the path to buying in. Right? One of the reasons people don't like intellectualism, sometimes for good reason, is because it can delay insight. It wastes time. The joke about uh, the guy with all these PhDs but can't push a broom. Fine. So you can subdivide ideas and phonemes, down to this infinite regress, all well and good. But if you are trying to pass forward a message of love, the best way to do it in our century, certainly in America, is to sell it like it's Charmin toilet paper. All right. It is squeezably soft. It's the best. It smells good. It'll make your tushy really comfortable. Right. Don't complicate the message. Love is good. Loneliness is bad. Loneliness comes from lack of love. 1+1 = bullshit. It's nice, but it oversimplifies and makes it very hard for people to relate to once they think about it for a moment. Because I guarantee you, a large proportion of the people who would be sitting down and watching Murthy are thinking, namby-pamby, it's probably a Hindu, yeah, all this stuff about love. And isn't how nice it would be. Yeah, unrealistic, weak, flimsy. Wouldn't you like a life with less conflict? Because you can't handle conflict. You can't handle the truth, which was a great Jack Nicholson ad lib, by the way.
Yeah, where's that from?
That was from A Few Good Men.
Okay. Yeah.
And whether he meant it, in this is deeply metaphysical way or not, when he gave that ad lib to Tom Cruise playing the lawyer, who is being insubordinate by interrogating the high-ranking officer, but doing his job. What he's saying is, son, your frame of reference is too limited to dare to talk to me about truth. There is an uglier truth that you couldn't handle if you even understood it.
Yeah.
And my point here is that, well, there's a piece of truth to what that character is saying. A piece of truth.
A piece.
That there is a piece of truth there, which is that life is a lot more complicated than that. That even if you embody love, you damn well better be ready for your neighbor who doesn't think that way, to come and either make fun of you or burn a cross on your lawn or lynch you or turn all the neighbors against you. Congratulations on your love. You're still going to be miserable, and we're going to make sure of it. So I think as well that, fine, you want a better analogy? Let's try the Karate Master, or Kwang Chai Kane, I think, the character from Kung Fu. Walk gently, walk in peace, but be ready for violence. And then when the violence is over, you settle back down to your oneness. You got to be ready. The idea that I think of the time machine as well. The H.G. Wells. You go 800,000 years into the future, and you have those who could afford to distract themselves from the ugliness of life, who have the means. I'm all right. So I'm thinking a little, along the commie line here, Joe, that 800,000 years in the future, the moneyed class has basically neutered themselves, completely neutralized any sort of power or survival mechanism in themselves by making life too pleasant for themselves. And so now they lounge around in the sun while the hard-working Morlocks, the nocturnal ape-like creatures who run the machinery underground, make sure that they're fed and that their material needs are taken care of. And then at night they harvest them for food. So that here you have a class revolution 800,000 years in the future. If you want it nice, be prepared to be eaten. Yeah. But that's the physical reality of the world. You want to talk Hegel and Marx? The dialectic is that there's going to be this constant turnover of forces, this opposing that, which yields this. But then the opposition to this comes in, and the cycle continues. This is where metaphysics, which is something that has been destroyed by most of modernism and postmodernism, comes back in. That this whole idea of a realm where love operates, well, it ain't here in Suffolk County. It's not here on the surface of the earth. It's a state of being that things can aspire to. But my point is that even if it's never realistic to live a life of absolute oneness and joy in the wholeness of God's creation, you still got to be able to defend yourself. You're still going to have to make a living here. You're still going to have to be able to protect what's yours and be a good person. But without that notion of love, why bother? Are you just looking to survive, or do you want better than that?
No, I agree. I think it's interesting because these concepts that we're talking about we are applying them on different levels. They can be very banal in one sense, but also very poignant and important in another sense. And just like you said, that you can't handle the truth like one kind of way, one piece of truth. There's also one piece of truth that comes from the opposite, that as long as you're able to turn to love, you'll be fine. That's a very banal saying, but in its essence, there's also some radical, profound truth to that. As long as you're able to turn yourself towards someone or some people and address them with your truth, you have that agency. You have that within you to be able to change your own circumstance by speaking from within yourself what you're feeling, and you can do that to a therapist, to a friend, to your partner, to a circle of people that unite in some kind of purpose, to your colleagues at work, because you own that capacity. You have built that capacity and that agency to turn towards the world in a way, with your fragility, with your vulnerabilities, with your weaknesses, and not be bolstered down in shame, and not be defeated by shame or some kind of imposed super ego demand on what you are supposed to be like according to somebody or some Bible or script of some sort, right? So as long as you're able to do that, you have in your hands a nugget of gold that will help you through different kind of socioeconomic conditions. And that's also one piece of truth. It's not the whole thing, not for all times and purposes, but there is something profound in that. And the other thing
You've
I wanted
done
to say
something,
is, I just wanted to chip in one more thing that I was starting to think about Michael Agan, and this kind of, I've read, it's been a while now, but in few of his books, he comes back to this image of destructivity, of internal, the human potential for destructivity is enormous. He writes about this in many books where he says that a hatred basically, or fear, works by destroying, even after there's nothing left to destroy.
Yes.
The machine will still, the tank in World War I, it will still plow, even after it's killed all the soldiers.
Keep grinding.
It keeps grinding over barbed wire and over, it just goes on and on. And I think it's very interesting to reflect on how we all have that potential within us. Because in one aspect, 1930s and 40s, very different economical conditions right now than it was back then, or at least quite different. But in some aspects, a lot of similar winds are blowing, right? So this points to some internal mechanism within the human psyche that we have not been able to transcend. And I think a lot of this comes from projection of our own tyranny, our own internal demons that we can't face. And we have to project that onto somebody out there, whether it's the Jews or the women or the gay people or the trans people or the black people or, whatever the other is, right? They're the ones to carry this internal fragility that we don't want to recognize. And I think that's the true kind of battle. I think as a psychoanalyst, Joe, you bring the kind of, and I would say I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I'm one unofficial psychoanalyst.
You're a psychoanalyst, Martin. Yeah. I dubbed thee Psychoanalyst Martin.
It's my license to Joe's unofficial Marxist degree. This would be my unofficial psychoanalytic training, right? Reading these books. And I think there's a real battle or frontier there in coming to terms what's within us. And that's not an easy. And I guess, coming back to psychedelics, maybe start to round off this episode also. Like Joe, you told us about, you had one beautiful experience, but also one terror-ridden experience, right? So I guess we could find these different things within us, right? You can strike gold, or you can strike terror, right? I don't know. Like
Well,
I don't have
something you
those
said,
experiences. Yeah.
Martin, two things. First, you nailed something here. When you
Mm,
talked about the projection, I'm encapsulating a projection of the inner tyranny.
yeah.
Yeah, we've all heard some version of how the ugliness in the outside world is really the projection of our own demons, but you framed it in such a, I got chills the way you put it.
Mm,
And I also thought that right there, that by bringing, making the connection, which you have done a couple of times today, between, well, loneliness was something that you had brought in originally,
mm,
shame,
mm,
the inner tyranny,
yeah.
and the nugget of gold that
Mm,
enables you to have something better or higher to fall back on after the divisions have been transcended.
mm.
You know that if you manage to live a good life and get away from conflict, all right, so what do you have left? Do you have just good weather, time
Mm.
to play, or do you actually have a higher thing to live, to embody? So I would ask you, both of you, actually say something about loneliness and shame and the inner tyranny and the alternative to it. What's on the other side of it?
Hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to go, Joe, or should I go?
Um, yeah, you go first.
Hmm. I think I partly answered it, but in like the backward way. Maybe I started by talking about this nugget of gold in, addressing the other with my vulnerabilities, with my own predicament, with my loneliness, if you will, of actually speaking that truth. If I could do that, that would mean that I own my own kind of faith in a way, right? Faith in a secular meaning in terms of trajectory, or if I can speak this loneliness or things that are inside of me to somebody, then I don't have to succumb to shame or isolation. So how do I come about to do that? I mean, that is a big question. And I think there it boils down to having experiences in life, being listened to, feeling valuable, being appreciated, being seen, those kind of things. I think that could be one thing of having had those experiences at one point of actually trusting that somebody would receive you in some capacity, right? That could be one thing. I guess another thing could be also courage, right? Like some kind of um, maybe not self-esteem, but more a feeling of self-worth in a way, right? So there is a courageous element of actually, fuck it, I'll just tell these people how I feel. I'm not, why should I not do it, right? Why should I not be truthful? So there is a few elements, I guess, like courage and having an experience of being feeling somehow important to somebody. And
How
also
about
I think that,
worthy
sorry.
of love? How
Yeah,
about
word. Yeah,
worthy of love and intimacy?
yeah,
And how
exactly.
shame works against that.
Yeah, no, and I think when I say having experiences of feeling important and to somebody, that is love, right? Having been loved and having been able to receive and also give love. Uh, so those are a few kind of elements of it. But to your last point, what's at the other side of it? I think it's that feeling of togetherness, that beyond quote, that truth, it what brings you together, right? So when you have spoken your heart in this way, in my experiences, it usually feels quite good, and that's the receipt that it worked in a way, right? You do this and you feel like, now it's like I can see clearly, I feel closer, I feel less burdened, I feel more uh, lighter, I feel at ease, uh, feel good about myself. All these kind of descriptions point to the opposite of feeling like hiding out, shame, isolation, frustration, tension, anger, you know. So there's kind of emotional feedback that comes from doing that. And I guess if one is able to do that continuously, I guess that's what they mean by healing in therapy, right? if you could do this over and over again, I guess your life would look quite different at the end of it, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, because
Beyond that.
that's what a therapist can give people also, right? Dan, you know this. Like, this is what you could do for people when they are lacking this experience. You could be that one that your patients can do this together with. And after a
Yeah.
number of years, they can come out kind of transformed almost in the
In the
best of
moment.
scenarios.
Yeah, there are these moments in therapy, and I'm never doing this as an advertisement for therapy specifically, but the way in which this came, and I had a moment like this with a patient yesterday, a military veteran who had been through some, a major thing while on duty, and then it brought up a trauma he had in childhood, and that he hasn't been able to trust at all. And something that came up in yesterday's session, in which he actually gave this feedback to me that this guy who had been really rather paranoid um, started to just talk more fluidly and talking about his vulnerability and how it's not safe to be able to let anybody in long enough to actually explain yourself to them. So there's this thing about loneliness as a survival mechanism, but also as one of the costs of it, side effects of it, is that you will never actually be known. You will never be understood because you yourself
Yeah,
cannot trust the other enough to, even if you could find the words to express yourself, you don't have the time because you got to be out of there. The shield has to come up and the exit has to be made. And so when I asked him, why do you suppose it is that it was so much easier to talk today? And he said something to me that was not about my greatness. I'm playing a part. Yeah, I've worked hard at it, but it's what a therapist does. I held together the baseline in a way so that he could talk the whole emotional experience through. And what he pointed out after that was that he's never done that before. He's never, is 30 some odd years, ever had a moment, a conversation, a moment with another human in which he had the luxury of thinking through an entire set of uncomfortable thoughts and coming out the other side.
mm,
So we're holding the line in a way, or we're holding the pulse, the drumbeat, so that a person can manifest themselves, can say it, can be what they're feeling and put it into words. And then you realize that, my God, if I've gone an entire life without ever feeling heard in this way, yeah, therapy can do that, but therapy is just an example
yeah,
of what
exactly.
people can
Yeah,
do when we can have our negative capability
yeah,
and just hang in there while
yeah.
things
You can do
form.
this with friends. We did this when you were over here, right? Both of us addressed the other person with some heartfelt things, right? So this can happen anywhere, I think.
Yeah.
Joe.
Well, I don't know. I one thing is I feel like I am still very much figuring this out for myself. So it's hard to, I don't know, encapsulate it or like give any kind of advice or anything. Um s- but
What are you trying to figure out? Can you say that?
yeah, well, loneliness and like uh I don't know, just making friends. Just kind of um
Making contact that matters.
yeah, I feel like um I haven't really made a lasting meaningful friend in like a decade. Um and I think we talked about this on one of the recent shows. Like
Yeah,
a lot of it's that I moved to Boston, and a lot of that time has been during the pandemic. So that's probably, that doesn't help. But yeah, it's something that's still a little bit of a mystery to me, and I can get along with people at work and in my socialist group and wherever else, and still never quite feel like, yeah, I've got friends. Besides my like college friends and the people I played in a band with in Philly, who I don't see much anymore.
Well, how about as a comedian, Joe? How about if one of the commonalities we have here is that if you go up on stage and do what comics do, which is almost invariably in some form to reveal something uncomfortable, but to do it in a way that gets others to identify with it, gets others to be uncomfortable, but then come out the other side through laughter. And then they believe that you get them. Now you're doing this and it's discomfort that drives it. You get up on stage, which is inherently uncomfortable. You're at risk of dying up there, right? Or you kill, which really means you have seduced, you have destroyed their will and you own them now, right? But we use the language of violence to talk about something that is really the opposite. There is a kind of love in comedy that you present suffering in such a way that not only do they laugh, but there's something behind what makes the laughter possible. So if you're getting up there and bringing your discomfort with yourself and the world to a crowd, why do you do that? And what's the payoff for you?
Well, I guess it's similar to what your patient said, that like I think comedy was really um appealing to me because I was a quiet kid growing up, and well, not as like a really young kid, but at a certain point, like I kind of like got quiet and shy, uh and sort of just struggled to like insert myself in conversations in the way that I perceive, at least, that a lot of other people can do. um and I just had a lot of doubts about myself socially and all this stuff. But then when I get on stage, I can just say all of it because I'm like, this is about me now. Like you're all gonna watch me and listen to me. So now I can actually, get out some of this stuff that I've been thinking about, and the rest of you do so much talking that I never get to say it. So here you go. Um, and so, yeah, it's a similar thing. I guess it's still just a puzzle of translating that to the rest of life.
And their laughter means what to you?
Well, it's acceptance. I mean, it's like uh, a lot of times it's like um, you feel like you're being told like, oh, you're not that weird. Like we all get what you're saying. Yeah, like and whatever doubts you had that you thought you were dumb or like had nothing to say, like no, like you're cool. We got you.
You're one of us now, or we want to be one of you.
Right. So
So Dan, what in your sense then? I mean, I'm thinking about the psychedelic experience is one of course of accessing this kind of sense of love and togetherness, and also in music and sci-fi, and these are kind of internal worlds and imaginary worlds in a way. Like, what are examples you've had of more related experiences of being able to share your inner world, or like speaking this sense of love that we're talking about now in a kind of related setting or whatever?
Two things came to mind. I was trying to, first you started to ask that, and I started to freeze up. I don't know if I remember an example. I have to have the perfect example.
Mm.
I'm humming. But then, like I tell my patients, when in doubt, just say what pops into your head.
Mm.
Here, it's okay. You wouldn't do this at Yankee Stadium. You wouldn't do it in a dive bar. Do it here. What pops into your head now? And two things popped into my head. One is that in the last few years, I have made a few really good friends. That, the fact that I had the courage to share my view of the world, which was my PhD dissertation, but it was like the only thing I could write was my statement of how I see things and turn it into an academic thing. And yeah, that paid off and I have a career, but more importantly, it got me a couple of friends, you, Martin, and Rachel, two people who reached out to me because they liked something that I wrote. And it turned into good, intimate friendships, people I trust and want to tell things to. That was one thing. But I've overtold that story. The other one that just came to mind was when I gave my father's eulogy in 2006. Would have been June the 5th. He died on June 1st, 2006. And I remembered it was a pretty good turnout for Dad. And I wrote a couple of notes and then I just got up and I didn't even look at them. I just told the story about him. And I didn't cry. I didn't want to cry. Tears were not the thing. Weeping was not the thing. I felt excited. I felt a sense of urgency that people know him the way I thought he should be known. And I wanted to honor him by talking about a certain angle on my dad. And it wasn't, believe it or not, a very long eulogy, but for 5 or 10 minutes, I felt like people actually wanted to hear what Lionel Sapinkoff was like, even people who knew him. That there was going to be no argument. There was going to be no debate about whether Dad was A or B. And yeah, you're given a eulogy, you have certain privileges. It's a custom. You don't argue with the eulogy. But I think it came to mind because in that moment, I had no agenda other than to honor my father the way I knew how to. And that is by having other people get my sense of who he was, which not because mine is best, but because mine is the only one I have.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how perfectly that answers the question, except it was transformative because right after that, I had a couple of dreams that were honestly and very, very bluntly about the difficulties of my relationship with my father and how it impacted my life. But even though they were painful dreams, it was like the honesty button had been pushed. I talked to the people at the funeral about this stuff. And then unconsciously, I started putting my own father related affairs in order. And it led to a tremendous amount of peace about what's not peaceful about me.
Beautiful.
It kind
Thanks
of,
so much, man, for
you
sharing.
get what I mean by that?
Yeah, for sure. That's felt very real when you spoke that. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you
And
for
also,
asking.
like, yeah, for me, I heard like being known, like you wanted your dad to be presented the way you knew him. And it's also you being known. In doing that, you become known as the one who presents your view of how he is to be known, right? So that phrase of being known just popped up to me as a kind of epitome of this. Like, if you're known, you're not lonely. Whoever we're talking about. I'm generalizing this now. Like to be known, for me, is an antidote or the opposite to be lonely. And that's very different than to be famous, to make a name for thyself. Those are corrupted
Yes.
versions of what I'm talking about now. Like to make a name for yourself or be famous or be someone, that's not to be known. To be known is what you just explained to us, you know?
And Murthy actually talks about this point about how with social media and
Yeah.
this world in which the boundaries that have always existed throughout the history of consciousness this is the case for the first time, that a person wants to be famous, they want to be known, make a name for themselves, all the things you said. But all of those things, there's several ways in which that destroys relationship. You're not known for you.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
known for this tiny little subset of what you are, which is artificial. It's meant to be a big shiny signal sent out to the universe so that you get the attention. But once that happens, there is no individual relating. Your personal relationships can't be based upon that. The those people cannot become your people. They are your customers. And this is why when people wonder, well, this famous person killed themselves, or this famous person is a drug addict, and they have money, and they have fame, and they have boats and cars, what do they have to worry about? How about nobody knows them and they don't know themselves anymore?
Yeah. One could say to be famous is to be not known, almost.
To be famous is to be
Could I just
unknown.
interject? Um, could, I have to pee so bad. Could you mind if I just run and do it, and then we can?
And then we can close it up, right? Because I need to
I
go.
think, yeah.
Kim needs to get into to the bedroom also.
Okay.
So yeah, but we can, if you want to go and or we just cut it now. Like I think that story you told Dan was very like you could even cut after that if you want. Like I don't need if know if you need all my comments there, but yeah.
Your comments are perfect. I would not get rid of them.
But what I was
Um,
saying, and if we go back to like let's start to wrap this up, and I was just saying like to be famous, one could say is almost to be not known in some sense, and maybe it's also about the forfeiting your own agency of being known, right? Like when you choose that option of being famous, you're also discarding the option of speaking in a way that Dan just did at this kind of funeral, right? Like those are different positions. So when you choose to go for fame, you're also choosing to not speak vulnerably from your subjective, unique worldview kind of thing. You're generalizing yourself and thus kind of losing yourself. But Joe, I'm handing it over to you to wrap up because I was also struck when you told about the comedy. You're like, they talk all the time, so I never get to say my things. I couldn't help but make the analogy to this forum where me and Dan are just like talking so much all the time. And so I thought that was quite interesting when you said that. So, yeah, let's try to make this forum somehow not a repetition of those memories where people are just talking all the time and you feel like I never get airtime.
It plagues me.
Joe from Boston, I'm listening. It's my bad Frasier imitation.
Yeah. So I think we went a lot of places. I think we kind of found our way back though, and yeah, I think just the worst thing to do, I think, after like recognizing this problem is to cop out the way that I feel like Murthy did in at least in these talks. Maybe the book is more detailed, but yeah, it's if you uh, find yourself dealing with all of this, um, you can't just say fear versus love to yourself, and that's that, because there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that and just embracing the time it takes, and the um how uncomfortable it can be while you are in the loneliness. um you know the first action you take is not going to fix it, but I guess it's just a process, and you should embrace it.
Yeah. Hey, why don't we cut this here? Let Joe pee, and I'll wish our huge, loyal, magnificent viewership listeners a really nice week, and thanks for helping us reel it in.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.